learning more about our multiple Wi-Fi systems here at the port offices. So there's times when we may have to go off video just to make sure we have the right Wi-Fi bandwidth. That could occur at various offices. So there's times when we may have to go off video just to make sure we have.
Okay, that was the sound of our live stream. Sorry, it's going now, so we're ready to proceed.
Although we've lost Michael, we cut him off in mid-sentence.
I was just pointing out that we have multiple Wi-Fi systems at the office, and sometimes we overload one or the other, and some of us here might not need to go off video to maintain the connectivity. So that could happen occasionally.
Okay.
That's all.
All right, then I'll call us to order at 5:02. And Genevieve, can you call a roll of attendance? I think you're muted, Genevieve.
Apologies, everybody. I'm just going to go down the list. So this is in no specific order. We have in attendance Commissioner Hobie Strike, Commissioner John Everett. Can you hear me?
Yes.
From staff, Michael McElway, Ann Medenbach, Genevieve Scholl, Fred Cowell, Commissioner Ben Shepherd, Commissioner David Merriweather, and then guests, Brad Boswell, Daniel Bates. From staff, Daryl Stafford. I think I already said David Merriweather. I'll say it again just to be safe. Legal counsel, Jerry Jakes. From staff, John Mann. From staff, Kevin Greenwood, Maria Diaz, and guest Mark Hickok.
Okay. Then do we have, Michael, any modifications or additions to the agenda?
Well, I wanted to point out that Commissioner Chapman will not be in attendance tonight, although she may be able to zoom in for a couple of the items that were further discussions required. And then Genevieve already introduced Mark Hickok. Mark's the Executive Director of the Hood River Valley Parks and Recreation. And he's, thank you, Mark, for attending. And I'll invite Mark to weigh in when we get to the parks efficiency item, which is a discussion item. And then I'm expecting that Lynn Burdett, who's the forest manager for the Mount Hood National Forest, will be in attendance later and can help us on the discussion about the event site reopening. No other changes from staff.
Then public comment.
Mr. President?
Yes, Hobie.
Commissioner Strike, I like the agenda on item 6, Commissioner Report, Hood River Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee Meeting Fiscal Year 20-21 Budget, Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. Thank you.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
Okay, I want to add a committee report for Commissioner Committee on number 6. It'll be the Hood River Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee Meeting Fiscal Year 2021 budget.
Understood. Okay, then back to public comment. The Genevieve, I assume the emails that have been distributed were the extent of the comment?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Unless Michael has somebody in the conference room.
President Strike, I'm in the commission room and I'm alone. There are no members of the public in attendance here at this time.
Then I'll move on to the, everybody has read the distributed emails. Is that true? Okay. Then moving on to the consent agenda. Would anybody like to discuss any of the items?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion in regard to the consent agenda to approve it as presented.
I'll second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Are there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair's aye. No. So presentations and discussions. legislative advocacy report. We got, Michael, you want to lead this or introduce Dan?
No, let me turn that to Kevin to do the introductions.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Just really happy that Brad Boswell and Dan Bates are able to join us this evening via Zoom. Welcome, guys. This is really an opportunity for our state level government affairs folks to really kind of summarize what has transpired in Olympia and Salem, and kind of give a little bit of a projection into the next year as far as what we should be working on as a port. So let's see here, I'm trying to see who's, looks like I've got Dan on here first. I do plan, just before Dan starts, I do plan on inviting Hal Heemstra, our Washington, D.C. Government Affairs contractor, to our June meeting. So, and then the ultimate plan is to bring the 3 lobbying contracts to the commission at the second June board meeting for commission review and approval. So with that, I will turn that over to Dan. Dan, welcome. We've got about 5-10 minutes just to kind of summarize what's transpired and what we should be looking for into the next year.
Great. Well, it's good to be with you, at least virtually, this afternoon. And sort of quick review from the last time we've chatted. We had the short session at the beginning of the year that ended up in a very odd place in which the Republicans, over protest of a couple pieces of legislation, most notably the cap and trade bill, left the Capitol and did not come back, which meant it was in a brief session and an already short session. Of importance there is that the port was able to, in one of the bonding bills, secure some funding for the airfield, had that session continued. And so that funding ended up not being ultimately included. And then, of course, the present crisis hit shortly thereafter. And so we'll talk about opportunities in the future there, but that funding, along as well as the funding for the water project in the 2019 session, were 2 pieces beyond the bridge that we've been working on among a number of other issues. But really the landscape has changed since that session because of the present crisis. And to give you a sense of where we're going, what's happening, and what's possible, I'll spend a few minutes on that. The governor presented to her agency's directions to come up with what amounts to a 17% cut in the present biennium for the state agencies. That biennium ends in July of 21. And so those agencies have submitted their proposals or ideas about how to make those cuts. Tomorrow morning is the economic forecast for the state, of which we peg our budgeting decisions off of. There's an expectation that there will be a drop in revenue in the billions number. It's not clear exactly what that will be. And frankly, it may just be a canary in the coal mine with regard to what the long-term effect of this will be. There will be another forecast in September that will inform a lot of those machinations and decisions. But that means not only is the present biennium are we going to see a cut, we'll also see a cut long-term in the next biennium budget that will be built in the long session of 21. The legislature created a coronavirus response committee that included both members of the Senate and the House. They put together a series of potential recommendations that they would advise that the legislature take if it's called into special session to respond. The governor, as you know, has issued a number of executive orders based on her emergency authorities. A lot of those proposals were put into place by the governor through her administrative authorities. And then the emergency board, which operates as the legislature's essentially budget committee when they are not in session, has made a number of decisions, making some allocations for certain types of relief or PPE or other types of frontline medical responses. They've also begun giving the authority to the Department of Administrative Services to spend some of the dollars that are flowing from the federal government as a result of the CARES Act and other relief programs that have been passed in DC. So a combination of the proposals that were advanced by the legislative committee, the governor acting through her administrative power, the emergency board making interim budget decisions, leaves the question of when we might have a special session in limbo. And we've heard that as early as next month for a special session, but it's also possible that there's a decision to wait until September when perhaps people could meet together more easily, although still probably socially distanced. And you may have another revenue forecast that has occurred that gives a better picture of where we need to go. One mitigating factor against that, which is the governor has the authority to make across the board cuts, which is why you saw the agencies propose the 17% cuts. That is not a very nuanced way to cut the state budget. The legislature would probably need to step in and make some selective cuts in different places to make a more nuanced package. You can imagine cuts in critical things like the Department of Human Services or the Oregon Health Authority's budget across the board and some other places may be equivalent to some cuts you may make elsewhere. So that would require the legislature perhaps to come into special session and make some of those decisions. At least that's the position that the governor's taken, and it appears that the legislature also believes that is the case. In particular, as we think about, we will monitor what's going on and have been monitoring for opportunities where Port or its constituencies and partners may be able to seek some relief. Right now, the state is in the midst of responding to the crisis. And so most of the activity and the expenditure is around meeting the crisis, keeping people safe, making sure that those that are on the edge with regard to self-sufficiency and other real deep reliance on some safety net programs are kept safe. Ultimately, there will be a turn towards making sure that we make an economic recovery, and not just in some of the business programs that you've seen, but also you will begin to examine policy moves, investments that are around the long-term recovery economically of the state. Obviously, the port's projects fit into that genre long-term. So the bridge replacement project, which we've been working on for a number of years, continue to work on, is a project that we would want to, in any kind of recovery, economic stimulus type of platform, want to advance and will be advancing. That's also true of the recent projects that have received funding. We also continue to monitor, and we'll talk a little bit about the 21 session. In this time of budget cuts, we are also watching carefully to make sure that allocations made to projects that we care about. For example, the two that I've already mentioned, one was funded, the other wasn't, but was included in the underlying budget, that those are protected as we move forward. We all start looking in the couches in these times, and we need to make sure that we're making the case that the investments are worthwhile at this moment, which they are. One piece that I should note, because it relates to the financing around transportation, which is the Highway Trust Fund dollars, as you might imagine, have declined significantly. That ODOT has been publishing sort of what those hits look like, and there's an expectation that those will continue to decline in this year, but then they are expecting revenues to pick up what they would have expected otherwise in starting next year. The trust fund, Oregon's Highway Trust Fund, ODOT has indicated will probably begin running out of funding in 2024. So that sets the stage from a policy perspective, from an investment perspective, for folks to think about how do we replace that, both in terms of raising new investments, but also different types of investments besides perhaps the gas tax. And so you'll begin to see the building of a package around that. The important in our advocacy is to make sure that the bridge is front and center in those discussions, that it is both a reason to advance a package and also involved in that. That is a multi-year process. We'll build the case, build the coalitions, be involved in that work. And really, if the trust fund is expiring in 24 in terms of its investment capacity, there will be some decisions that they have to make about investment in the 2023 session. That work hasn't really begun in earnest right now, and that's because we're obviously in the midst of a crisis, and folks' heads are in what I was mentioning before is the immediate response from a healthcare perspective, but it continues to be on the forefront as we begin thinking through how do you come out of an economic crisis like this. Transportation historically has fit very well into the stimulative type of activities that we can invest in. That's sort of broad overview on where we've been and where we're going. There's a lot that is unknown, but the path in 21 has to do essentially with protecting the investments that have already been made. And there won't, as I mentioned, there won't be a lot of new money. So there isn't going to be a lot of opportunity probably in 21 for new investments, but we will be building the case. It will be important to build the case as we turn towards economic recovery, both to profile the bridge and its need in the 21 session, and then the work after session, starting to look at the future sessions beyond that. Brad and I keep in touch, and to the extent that there's progress in Washington, we always look to leverage investments in different places to make sure that the states feel as if they have equal partners here, and Brad and I stay in communication around that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Dan, this is David Merriweather. So you're saying you don't think if there is any sort of an economic recovery or infrastructure package in a special session, you don't think that would occur in a special session if that be one, but more likely even after that?
Yeah, my sense is that you will probably not see a typical stimulative type of package passed in a special session. It is more likely to be a relief package to cover investments where agencies in crisis around responding to COVID need additional funding. That's probably what a special session would address, as well as evening out the cuts. It's unclear at this point.
I have one other question that's not directly port related, but I know that there was a proposal for, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm getting some cutout here in the mostly the verbal stuff. Do you know if the e-board has taken up the governor's request for? There was a significant COVID response for agriculture. I think $29.5 million that was going to go before the e-board. Do you know if anything has happened with that at this point?
My understanding is that in the e-board set of packages that passed on Friday, there were some funds embedded in one of the underlying actions using federal dollars to help offset some of the costs for worker protection in the agricultural community. My understanding from that discussion was that it was not anticipated that this would cover all of the costs, but would be a part of the state's effort to offset some of those costs.
Thank you.
Dan, I would just point out, I know you know Mark Landauer well, and OPPA is attempting to pull together the COVID impacts related to Oregon ports and sort of pulling them together and then funneling it to the legislature for potential opportunity in some sort of relief package. In fact, I think OPPA is testifying Thursday in front of one of the committees. So we'll keep track of that, and I know you will as well, as a sort of ally in this effort.
Kevin, I think you're on mute.
All right, Brad, let's give you your turn, and then we can do a series of Q&A afterwards and cover both states.
Sure. I'll start really quickly. We did make it through the Washington State short session, which was 60 days, ended on March 12th, right as things were really kind of blowing up in and around this current COVID situation. We were able to generally get through session. The legislature did allocate $200 million from the reserve account at the time for Corona-based extended expenditures, primarily into the state public health system and hospital system. We also, again, no one foresaw sort of where this was going to head at that time. We have since obviously shut the state down, just like Oregon. Right now, the state is facing at least a $7.5 billion 4-year budget hole. It's still unclear how it's going to change. There is discussions around a special session, just like Oregon. Timing, just like Oregon, is up in the air. There are some key sort of points, including the June revenue forecast, which is supposed to come out sometime around June 17th. July 1, the state fiscal year is a big date. And then I think everyone is hopeful that the feds are going to step in and send some state and local relief. But again, all of these are, as Dan said, unknown at this point. On a positive note, coming out of this session, we were able to identify, and I want to be real clear in terms of this verbiage because it's important. We were able to identify approximately $5 million from another project in Yakima, a series of off-ramps that was line itemed without being defined, but was line itemed for the Port of Hood River. What I want to kind of nuance here with folks is that right now within the transportation budget, that is not specifically identified. It's just a line item of $5 million. Senator King, as well as staff, did not want to identify specifically the Hood River crossing for that because there were dozens and dozens of other projects that were not getting any resources. And rather than create a sort of any political fervor over that, they decided to just create the line item without defining it and save the defining for what would be the supplemental budget early on in 2021, probably the back half of January. Again, that was coming out of session, and that resource, assuming it either gets defined or would have gotten defined, would flow through to the county and be used in some way to support the Hood River crossing project. That still sits right now. Unfortunately, the transportation budget, the revenues, according to current estimates, the revenue streams are losing about $100 million a month in Washington State, as far as the difference between what were expected revenues and what are currently coming in for the gas tax and other transportation-based funding streams. Obviously, when the economy returns and things pick up, those things will change, but it has thrown a great big question mark into what or how that resource is going to proceed forward. We know that it's still a high priority with Senator King, and he is in a position hopefully to protect that. But again, part of that is going to be an unknown that we're going to have to navigate in the coming months in that. I will also similarly echo what Dan, Washington State has been building for the last year or two towards even before the Corona situation, towards a infrastructure package, transportation package. And even though I think that some of that has at least gone into hiatus as they deal with the current crisis, we know that the transportation chairs, the various staffs continue to work towards that. And as I think you'll start seeing the coalitions begin to form again around that, and not just, because the transportation needs are significant, but also, just like Dan said, you'll start to see the messaging pivot more towards recovery and re-energizing the economy. And transportation packages are one of the few tools that the state has to do that. So I think I continue to believe that there's going to be major efforts towards a transportation package in the 2021 session. Again, whether it gets over the finish line, time will tell, but there's going to be a growing sentiment towards the need for that. You also are going to be able to take advantage of relative cheap gas prices, which make transportation taxes usually more attractive, as well as, I don't know if anyone's been following the media lately, but one of the major transportation thoroughfares through Seattle, the West Seattle Bridge, literally, depending on who you talk to, could go into the river at any moment, depending on what it was. And that would really, really cause some massive impacts to the city of Seattle and surrounding communities. I only bring that up because it just adds more fuel to the transportation package need. And I do believe we'll continue to be in position to work towards being a part of any transportation package. As you all hopefully know, we have, in terms of the straw man proposals that have been put out by the Senate Transportation Chair, we have been a project that's been identified in there on the Senate side. We'll continue to do that and continue to work on both the Senate and House side to try and continue to position ourselves towards some significant Washington state-based investment. I think, I know Kevin mentioned earlier, what the feds do is also going to be very important. I think that if the federal government does get more serious about a national infrastructure program, all the states are going to be needing matching funds and those kinds of things, which will spur, again, I believe Washington, probably Oregon, to really start getting serious about moving something forward in the infrastructure space. I don't want to belabor too much as far as the current COVID situation. It's obviously emerging, but is going to have some significant impacts on all the budgets and all the various scenarios that we're going to be dealing with. It's probably easier at this point if I stop talking and Dan and I kind of respond to questions. Period. That's the end of my speech.
Hey, Brad, just a quick question for you. Assuming that unspecified placeholder from the off ramps in Yakima, that slides through the process, what's the best case scenario for those funds actually being released through WashDOT or to Klickitat County or Southwest RTC? What's the practicality of that?
I think if they identify it and push it forward in the supplemental budget, which usually passes sometime early on in the legislative session, usually end of January, early February, it could be available to at least start getting dispersed in and around July, would be my guess. But that would be absolutely best case scenario. And I don't want to, there's so many things that are up in the air around that. That would be best case, and don't hold me to that.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions?
I would just like to give a shout out to both of these guys. They did yeoman's work in getting signatures and letters, not just for the build grant that went out, but also for the infra grant. And so there's just no way that it would have been very difficult for staff to pull all that together quickly and meaningfully. So Brad and Dan, thank you for pulling those letters together and continuing to advocate for our funding efforts.
Brad, Dan, I'd like to say thanks as well for, coming to this Zoom meeting. It's really nice to put a face on the checks we sign out for lobbying efforts.
Well, I will just say that I look forward to the opportunity to, being there in person. I love the area and coming down, and I think we all want to be able to return to, some of those more fun and interactive activities other than this growth out of my ear, which seems to really get tiring. And so I think both Dan and I are ready to be face to face in the not too distant future.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay, Kevin, you got more there?
Nope. Like I mentioned, I will have Hal do a similar report at the first June meeting. So Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Hey, Kevin, if possible, I wouldn't mind being on that if I could be invited just to hear what your federal folks have to say.
Good idea. No, that's great. I'll send that out to you and Dan so you can participate if you're able.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, the next up is the Recreational Providers Efficiency Study Report. And Michael, you're going to lead that with Terry?
Yeah, let me just start out. It seems like a lifetime ago, but last September you approved an IGA with Portland State University to carry out what we're now calling an efficiency study. It's effectively an opportunity to look at collaborative partnership with, in this case, Hood River Parks and Recreation, and see if there's a way in which our efforts can be conjoined or combined or enhanced in some way that brings efficiency to one or both sides. This effort was led by Terry Moore in conjunction with Mike Gleason. Terry, I always affiliate him with lots of acronyms, and his affiliation here is the Initiative for Exceptional Governance at the PSU Center for Public Service, which is translates to IEG PSU CPS. Might be one of the longer ones I've encountered, but it's some indicator, some litmus test for the depth of experience that Terry brings, and Mike Gleason as well. So this is a chance to look at the final report, to hear directly from Terry and Mike on what they saw when they looked at our operation and Hood River Valley Parks and Rec, and it really represents what I think was a real gratifying collaboration with Hood River Valley Parks and Recreation Department led by Mark Hickok, and he's a tremendous partner to look at and to work with. I just point out, and I think Terry might too, in our last public survey, this was one of the highest positive ranked yeses, which was the port should look for collaborative opportunities and greater efficiency. So certainly the public is looking at how we operate, not only us, but how public agencies operate, and recognizes that there should be an opportunity and an effort to look at efficiency. So I feel like we're following through on what the public was saying, and I'm glad to have been working on this with Mark and Terry and Mike. Mark is with us, and again, Mark, if you have any remarks to lead us into this, please do. That's a no. So Terry, we'll turn it over to you for a slideshow and your advice.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Michael, and thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to talk to you now. So Genevieve, I've got you taking care of the stuff on the screen.
Yep.
Oh, great.
Can you see everything okay?
I can.
there?
I
Okay.
can see the screen. It closes out everybody else in my screen share, but that's okay. I'll figure out how to deal with this. So got the the introductory slide here, and Mike pointed out that we're working on this. He mentioned me, and I want to just introduce Mike Gleason, whom you don't know. At least I've talked to you through the strategic business plan, but Mike is 50 years in public service, county administrator three times, a city manager 4 times, his last 20 years with the city of Eugene, and has worked with me for probably 25 years, and I for him occasionally, and is the person, I think, who is the most knowledgeable about the nuts and bolts of government management at the city and county level in the state of Oregon. So when I saw, he and I are working together at PSU, but Mike's knowledge about this is critical to what we're trying to do here. Next, let me give you an overview of just the context here and I think Michael's already covered this, so I won't take long. We're trying to get to efficient service delivery. Everybody agrees that's a good idea. Next is that there is co-production of some services. This work's going to come up a few times in our report and probably tonight, but co-production means in this limited sense that the agency in charge of delivering the service is not delivering the service by itself. And in our opinion, co-production is the norm, not the exception. Next, Michael's already talked about this, the ongoing discussions between Michael and Mark about the possibility of some co-production. And next, Michael also talked about, here are the quotes from that survey that was done as part of the strategic business plan that emphasizes the importance of some type of co-production or some type of partnership. And I really think a critical part of that is that on the one hand, it's not very surprising. The public clearly wants efficiency. And if they get a question, do you think it would be a good idea for agencies to cooperate? You can expect a pretty high level of positive response. So the question is, are there ways that you can effectively cooperate? And that's important to do that investigation. And it's also important to be able to tell the public that you've done that investigation. So I think that's where we are on this one. The next, we ended up getting the assignment to do this work. And you can find this on page, let me just check here. I'm going to come back to this part in a minute, on page 8 of our report. But I've emphasized the word preliminary here in that it's a technical analysis for technicians, and it's got some implications for the public, but it's mainly trying to get some background technical work done that the port and the district asked us to get done. So we're working off of documents, including a recent document that the district did, a very good study of their facilities, but didn't go into detail on some of the operational issues that we spent a little more time on. So we did the work, and the main way we did it is listed here. If you care more about that, page 8 of the report will show it to you. Next, there's the report, and that is in your packet, page, I think, 37. And it also has 3 appendices, which are not terribly long, but they were more than in a big packet that you already had, more than Genevieve thought she should put in there, and I agree with her. But if you want more information, there are 3 appendices that you can get that are on the order of 5 pages each. And then there's this presentation. So those are our products. Next, I want to hit the 3 appendices are one on background data. So if you care about digging into what you've got in terms of facilities, staff, and equipment, that's on that one. The next one, Appendix B, is on, if you could show Appendix B there, some ideas about just giving an example of what a detailed evaluation would be. Mike may talk about it more, but we're at a pretty high level here, and everything is so dependent on the specifics. that we wanted to show that we hadn't done that kind of work, but how you might do it. And the next one, finally, Appendix C, is about other advice about implementation that's a little more detailed than what showed up in the report itself. So with that, just a little bit of framework here. A key point in our study is about scale. And if you're talking about, trying to get economies, you're almost always talking about economies of scale, because economies of scale allow you specialization. Specialization allows you efficiency. Our report talks about that quite a bit, starting on in the background section on this, and Mike will come back to that. Next, there's also this idea of workflow, and this Mike is very strong on this point, that the specifics of how the workflow goes is really important. And you can think of workflow as the specific tasks, the systems that you have in place, and how the work actually gets done, as opposed to broad thinking and rules of thumb about, well, you might be able to save 15% because some other place did it. Mike's point is, it doesn't make any difference what another place did. It's how your operation is set up. And next, key in the report, we set up these 4 levels of collaboration. The first is informal, verbal agreement, and the next 3 are formal. The first has some possibilities for improvements, but the real work is in the second and third. The fourth is beyond the scope of anything that we are thinking about or that we think you are thinking about, and is a place that agencies only get to rarely, and they don't get there without moving through either 2 or 3. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Mike to talk more about the findings.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to meet all you folks. Very glad that we could do this work. We enjoyed the work. And one of the key ingredients in dealing with productivity and efficiency and effectiveness is the culture of the organization. And whether it's private or public, the culture is, the managerial culture is fundamental. Absence that, it's virtually impossible to get efficiency and effectiveness. It turns out that you happen to have a rare institution that is really well organized in terms of its efficiency and effectiveness. And I don't say that casually, because I do this quite a bit, and rarely do I see an operational team that has such a grasp on continuous improvement and organizational development. So from that standpoint, you have a tremendous asset, because typically you have to build that from ground up before you can get to any of the efficiencies issues. The other point I want to just quickly talk about, efficiency and effectiveness go hand in glove. Efficiency is the things you do, and do you do them well? And effectiveness is, what is it you've chosen to do? So a good example is, you might be a fantastic organization at making buggy whips, but having chosen that field, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to go bankrupt. The question of effectiveness lies heavily in the area of policy, and therefore at the board level. The efficiency lies heavy in organizational development and managerial questions, but they have to be integrated, and the methodology has to be integrated. Now, when you reach out to another organization and say, we want to gain efficiency and effectiveness by doing something together, that is the marriage that is the most trepidatious, trying to link up the effectiveness, efficiency, and culture. And if you don't, what you get out of these efficiency efforts is a lot of heartache and a lot of lost opportunities. So that's a key underline in our report, and you can read more detail about that if you wish. The next kind of thread that every board always starts with this is, well, how much money can we save? And I hate to say this, it's the wrong question. You will save any organization that spends significant time and has a culture of continuous improvement, examining outputs, measuring productivity, dealing with the equipment and capital in its most efficient manner. We'll have a more optimized level of cost of outputs. That is axiomatic. But you cannot take improvements to system and say, oh, see, now we improved that, and now we have $60 of free cash floating around that wasn't there before.
Wait a minute, Mike, just 1 second. Genevieve, I see the puzzled look on your face. This is Mike. He's freelancing. You won't find where he is. When he stops, he will come back and we can tell you where he is in the slideshow.
Okay, I'm sorry
Okay,
about
just tell me when you want the next slide. Just
All
say,
right, I'll do that. Well, I leave that slide there because I will go to it in a minute. I just wanted to lay this groundwork. So you will become more efficient if you focus on that. And if you can get more than one agency that is co-producing, which you clearly are, then there are opportunities to scale up and do it effectively. And the difficulty that you're confronting right now is one, there's so much unknowns that out there that it's, you know, it's fraught with all kinds of peril to undertake any organizational change at this point, I suspect. But it is very much expected from the community that all public agencies work together. And frankly, they rarely do because it is really hard to get these cultures to match up. So your opportunities are in the larger scaling. That is, the port is actually very well organized, well funded, and well designed around capital operations and how they go about efficiently producing their products. The Parks District has been undercapitalized and underfinanced from the get-go, and was created as an attempt to get a budgetary problem out of another organization and pass it off. And then they decided to get into a business that they never even funded. So it isn't that the policy people or the managers are inefficient. It's just that they've got a history there of being extremely under optimizing their products and their management. And that's just a function of there's just not enough resource to deal with it. And so when you start to merge that, there will be economies of scale. You will gain something, most probably around first steps around administrative things, which are the easiest to do and are the most high yield. And you could do it around operation, but the Parks District will gain more than you do. It's just because, but they may be confronted in order to achieve greater efficiency. They will have to make some capital choices and some operating choices. And there will be a question if they have enough money to even undertake that. So, and in the report, I won't go through detail. We've done some hypotheticals about what you could yield, what kind of money you're fooling with. You know, $60,000 or $70,000 a year in yield is possible as we look at it. And I won't go into details about that. But once again, it won't show up as cash flow in your organization. It'll simply show up as less expense for given output, which would typically, what happens in a budget is your beginning cash balance might increase a little bit. So, but in the long run, if you're doing this focused year after year, continuous improvement, those numbers become compounded. And just as inefficiency becomes compounded. So the scale issue is not only size of organization, it's time focusing on these productivity issues. Now, the significant opportunity that lies in front of you, I believe, is that since the park system is so co-produced and you all have fragments of it, the opportunities for scale are really quite large. However, each new organization represents all of its special charges. And so I would not recommend, and it doesn't look like you are interested in doing, that you would start out with a, hey, let's get everybody together and we'll fix everything at one time, and the county and the city and the Port Authority, Park District, feds and the state will all get together and we'll all get it worked out. So I think the possibility of doing that it would just drive pretty much everybody Looney Tunes, and I think it would finally just die of its own weight. The approach that does work is the one you're on, where you work with a district that's eager to work with you, that has competent management and has a real interest, and that you learn how you go about doing this work and how you succeed, and you show or demonstrate progress. And then other people will come to your party and say, hey, what about us? We'll say, yeah, well, okay, we're willing to take this on if you're willing to do these things. The key ingredient in all of this is everybody must win. Nobody can lose. And that it sounds impossible, but it's not, because this is the public's asset. And it's the public's asset that can be optimized. So there is possibilities for winning for every agency. You can never have any progress as soon as one agency is convinced that they're somehow giving up authority, getting screwed, or being talked down to, or all of those things, because all agencies are hyper concerned about their image, and particularly around productivity, because all of the press that goes around that. So that is a very important. Yeah.
Mike, just to check in, I think you're on the next slide, and we're probably getting close to time to wrap up, given
All right.
our time.
And so if you can achieve this, you have a goodwill that you can use with other partners. You will be responding to public. The public will be very pleased with this, and you should involve the public in the discussion, because it'll give you the benefits for moving through other steps, and it will inculcate that culture that you've got started there, and reinforce it for efficiency and effectiveness that already is in your organization. So with that, questions, answers?
I'll just conclude by saying, Mike, go to the next slide there. Thank you. Why don't you just click all the buttons? Let's turn over all the cards. Thank you, Genevieve. And well, one back. And I think, Mike, you already covered most of these points on, what the next steps would be. Your point there of involve, of the third one, when all parties agree, that's the mutual benefit part. So I think these are pretty straightforward ideas. And I guess the punchline is almost certainly our economies of co-production. The really big possibility that's out there is that not only the port and the parks district, but also the city, the county, and the school district get together on parks, maybe not only on parks, but on other aspects of central services. And now you're into joint purchase agreements and stuff like that, where there's some real potential for economies of scale. But those are bigger deals and longer off. So that I think what we're saying is at the parks and recreation level, at the port and district level only, there's there's already a level of staff coordination. There's more that could be done. There are some potential for joint arrangements. And again, remember, we did this study before COVID hit in. There are other priorities now. But that's where things stand. And I think I'll leave it there and go to questions.
Terry, before we go to questions, there is one piece that was in the chart that Terry gave, and that is there's a continuum between we're going to work together and we're going to consolidate our organizations. I never recommend consolidation. If it happens, fine. But a lot of people start this whole concept with, well, we got to consolidate to gain efficiencies. Absolutely not true. And working that continuum agreement, where you want to be in that level, is a key first step, both policy and managerial. Okay.
So this is an opportunity for questions from commissioners and any points of clarification.
Michael, I think it was, Terry and Mike, thanks for the report. It was particularly well written. I enjoyed reading it. I mean, it does leave what is the next step. It seemed to me that the scale kind of doesn't exist if we're just talking about the port and the parks. And to move into the other governing bodies as an attempt to increase scale, we don't have any bandwidth to focus on that.
Well, I think you do have an economy's opportunity there. And if you refer back to the report there, I made a hypothetical guess that you could reasonably expect to get some scale in terms of procurement, probably also some scale in terms of other administrative factors.
Yeah, that could be promising. That could be promising.
Yeah, and the working through that sets you up to work through the others. So, the act of saying you want to do this and doing it are two separate events. And so to have your organization start on something that's doable and work through it as a team, then gives them the exercise to step to the next level. And it turns out, and I've done a lot of these consolidation operations before, and it turns out that the private sector, just by saying, they don't really know what the organizational size is. And if you go out to procure something and it's a joint procurement, they tend to start sharpening their pencils because they think they're going to get a much bigger opportunity. And so you gain, much to my surprise, a kind of a broad benefit right out of that. The third thing you get out of it, even though it doesn't look like a gigantic budget saving opportunity, is you get goodwill, substantial, from your public to say, man, they're really trying and we really appreciate that.
John, I have a question. Now, Terry or Mike, you'll probably scold me for asking this question because I should know the answer. But over the years, especially recently, people have noticed the coexistence of sites on the waterfront that are very similar, that have similar needs. And I point specifically to Waterfront Park, and I point to the surrounding parks and open spaces that are more or less maintained by the port. Likewise, the streets are bifurcated in that way. Is there any opportunity to maybe look through the other end of the telescope and say, within a geographic area that's so defined and so visible and has such an overlap of direct services by two different agencies, and use that as sort of a geographic test case, as it were, for allocating or sharing services in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start and then let Mike come in. actually, I won't be able to stop him. I'm not there with him, which is my normal. We considered that kind of thing, Michael, and it reminds me of, well, never mind what it reminds me of, but it seems kind of obvious that you should be able to do that. But when you start to get to the workflow level, and then you say, okay, well, if this is going to happen at a district level, the district boundaries are not the same as the port's boundaries, and which equipment and how are we going to coordinate that equipment, et cetera. So when you look at it from a big point of view and say, well, we're going to try to do it on everything for both jurisdictions, it starts to seem pretty complicated for what you get out of it. If, on the other hand, you look at it at the workflow level and say, well, for this area where we've got 3 parks near each other, and we've got, and we're both hiring, and this isn't true, but if it were, we're both hiring different private sector people to come in and clean our bathrooms, and we've got different service standards and they're at the same place, wouldn't it be more efficient if we did it together? Those economies are there. They're small, but nonetheless, you might get better production. You might, and as Mike says, there's the public goodwill, and it's the start of the conversation that gets the operating agencies working together. And especially when you have one like yours, which is, John and his group, heavily into continuous improvement, they start seeing that, and you won't be able to stop them. They'll say, okay, good, that worked. Now let's take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When the organization starts giving a lot of kudos to the people that actually do the work for focusing on improvement and productivity and working together, they become like mad dogs. I mean, they take that and they go with it. They love it. I remember doing the city of Eugene, we were trying to consolidate operations and maintenance for fire and police and ambulance and everybody else. And we turned a team loose, and they came up with this concept that they were going to be like the maintenance people on a racetrack, where they'd be ready when they drop by, and they take the wheels, and it just turned out to be unbelievably good. Everybody loved it. The staff, the cars, and all the equipment was maintained at a much higher level. And if I for some reason decided to undo that, it would have been probably my job. So getting that started, and you already have a big jump on that, but getting that started generates an organizational benefit that's quite positive. So don't underestimate that potential, but don't underestimate how long it takes to get through the first 2 or 3 changes.
Right, thank you.
If I could, I'd like to hear from Mark, and I hate to put you on the spot, but you've been a part of this, and I don't know if your board has seen this yet or heard of the presentation, but what your thoughts are, Mark, and especially in light of, I know you have some capital plans and other things coming up in well, you have had them in the relatively near future. I don't know if they're still in place, but what your thinking is about the opportunities that have been discussed here.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. My board has not seen this yet. In regards to our capital plans, I think I briefed you last November about us going out in November of 2020. Our board was set to go forward with that, and given the recent activities, they have backed out of that. So they are not going in November of 2020 again. I think that right now, everyone is just trying to figure out how we deal with this current situation and get back to normal. So we haven't, this report is great, and it was coming out right around the time that we were starting to deal with all of this. So we haven't really had a chance to have the conversations about implementing it. I think that Terry and Mike are right. There are some opportunities in there on the admin level of me meeting with John and Fred and talking about, some joint purchasing agreements and things like that, and kind of dipping our toe in with some of that stuff to start. I think this was a pretty hard project. We were looking for that silver bullet, and it doesn't exist because we both do our jobs, very well, and we don't have a lot of fat to be, to be cut, and we don't have a lot of inefficiencies to be found, and so it's really going to be us coming together to really try and just work closer together and more communication. I think that was another big thing, which, just in one of these meetings that we were over there, I was meeting with John Mann, and he started mentioning some stuff about his computer software and how he lines out his guys for the day. And then he's invited us back to take a look at that. And just that conversation changed a lot of the ways that we do things. And I think that a lot more of this meeting, intentionally to talk about workflow and how we do things and, what tools we have. I was also in the back area and seeing some of the stuff that you have and thinking, boy, you guys have a genie lift. Okay. And being able to start sharing some of these resources will help out quite a bit. But as far as that silver bullet, we're still looking for it.
Oh, Mark, if I'm going to add,
Sure.
I'm going to risk adding a couple points to that.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. One of the things that we have talked about, and by we, I mean all of us, the port, the district, and we, the consultants, is that when the district was thinking of going out for, some type of assistance with funding, we said, well, there's going to be the question, well, why do you need that? Why can't you just deal with what you got? And are you really being efficient? So there was an importance of at least covering this aspect of it. And as you can see from the survey that got done after we started, the public was going to ask that question. Well, how do we, why don't you just coordinate with the port and then it'll all be fine? So the answer to that question is, here's the hole that the district's in, and they're not going to get out of it with that kind of thing. The second thing is that by doing this, if, and this is the hypothetical, but if the district were successful in refinancing in such a way that the very necessary new pool, I mean, if you're going to have a pool, a new pool is necessary, would then be part of the bundle. Now you're working with an organization that is better funded and probably has more equipment. And now this idea of joint procurement, you're already moving along. And as you do that, what Mike and I are thinking is, if you get that far, it may be the two things are simultaneous. That for Mark to pull off a new funding mechanism that is sufficient to deal with a new pool, it may require that there be joint co-production agreements among not a consolidated agency, but that some of these procurement things there, and maybe there are contracts going back and forth where there are efficiencies to be had. So it's just I'm not saying that that's right. I'm saying that that's the incremental stuff that Mike's talking about, and why we were so interested in this study.
Well, I'm going to throw two bits in. I'll just make a bold statement based on what I've observed and what I've read in the area. And yeah, I know people in the city, and I'm pretty familiar with the county. I've gone through the city's budget, the county's budget, and I haven't gone through the school districts, but I've done that before, and in other school districts. You guys are, by your nature, tremendous facility maintenance operations. School districts, counties, and cities are typically really bad at facility maintenance. It's just not, police office and sewage treatment plant operators, just not their thing. And that is one huge economies of scale if you can work it out. And as soon as you can demonstrate capacity through a joint agreement, I'm confident it wouldn't be long before somebody knocked on your door and said, hey, What about us? And that's where the scale starts to really run up. And you guys are in the business of doing grounds, building maintenance and equipment maintenance as it's supposed to be done. And none of the other operations probably are. It's not that they just don't scale up that way.
Well, can I just say thank you to Terry and Mike. This was a small contract and a big effort that was an outside effort compared to the contract. But this was really interesting and valuable for us and allows us a bit of a roadmap forward once we get through the current crisis, when we have time to think more carefully about some of these recommendations. So I want to express my thanks for really good work.
Well, good. And I want to, on behalf of Mike and me and our affiliation with PSU, it was a pleasure working with you and Mark and your staff. It just was pretty. It was challenging work, but interesting because you guys were helping us with the data and doing your part of it. So thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leaving you to your next agenda item. Thanks very much.
Mark, you can stick on the Zoom if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I will.
Speaking of our next agenda item, the recreational facilities reopening. This is going to be an interesting topic.
Oh,
Yeah. Michael, you want to start it out?
sure. Just now for an easy topic. This really is a discussion about the event site and its a trajectory for a reopening or partial reopening. I tried to lay out some of the general conditions and remind you of the current status of the waterfront, but effectively we're facing a question and growing pressure to open up our recreational facilities. So far, it's been, I think, very successful, except for a few instances. We've had people increasingly accessing the waterfront and getting into the water. And by and large, personally, I've been very pleased with what I've seen. People are recognizing the limits on crowds and respecting distancing and all those things. But now we're facing Memorial Day weekend, we're facing warmer weather, we're facing better wind conditions for the kite community. And we said before, we want to be in concert with and collaborative with other recreational agencies. And so as we look ahead, we want to explore and get some direction from the commission tonight about specifically the event site. Lynn Burdett is with us, and thank you, Lynn, for hanging in there through the last hour or so that you've been part of it. Lynn is the forest supervisor for National Forest here, U.S. Forest Service, and she's also the area manager for the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area. And I consider her sort of a superwoman when it comes to bringing together all the diverse recreational agencies, state, local, federal, in a collaborative effort to compare notes and think ahead and make good decisions as we're trying to all respond to this, the current situation. And I will invite, and we should all invite Lynn to weigh in and give us her thoughts on this. So as I'm looking at it, there's three options. One is to, we can keep the event site closed through the Memorial Day weekend, perhaps longer, not sure how much longer, but next week, it looks like there will be some other agencies that are beginning to open up their recreational facilities some. So that's one approach. Two, we could open it up for Memorial Day weekend. That certainly has some positives with the local kite community. And I will say that I think to a large extent, we're talking about the kite community and to some extent the windsurfing community that is very anxious to get on the water. But if we open it up, we would have to be prepared for that. We would have to recognize the high water conditions that exist now. There's very little sandbar, so there's very little real estate for laying out lines and pumping and drying and all that. And so it would have to be prepared for it, and we'd have to be prepared for the the perception, the optics, the people that are rightfully concerned about how the area is opening up and what relative increase in risk that might bring. And then there's a couple of alternatives for, depending on where you want to go with this, about a sort of partial reopening where we have limitations. We allow some access there at the event site, but we don't open it up in a full way with full services. So tonight, what we're seeking is some discussion. It can be a short one or it can be a long one, but we want to make sure the commission's giving us good direction, and we're hearing from people like Lynn and others about what the best approach is here as we look to the event site. So maybe with that, Lynn, if you're willing and able, I know you've attended a lot of Zoom meetings with many agencies. So this is one more, but perhaps if you would give us some thoughts about what you're seeing.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all. And what I wanted to share was how we're approaching this as federal and state agencies. Give you a brief synopsis of that. We have been trying to have a coordinated effort for those agencies that are within the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area. So the Forest Service, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Washington State Parks, Washington Department of Natural Resources, and the Army Corps of Engineers. You'll notice I didn't mention the cities or the parks. We have been having dialogue with them, including them in the conversations that we're having. However, you know, the environment that we operate in and the natural environment is a little different than what you all are responsible for managing, and we're definitely not experts in that. So we're coordinating as was discussed, but we're not necessarily trying to align exactly. What we've been able to pull together, working with the counties and getting input from them and the cities and public health folks, is a strategy to sort of have a phased opening. We did get input that everybody thought, do everything at once and make it simple to understand. What we're really clear about is that's not possible. So we're looking at a phased approach. We'll start with day use areas and looking at probably May 27th, a week from tomorrow, to phase into those day use areas. So that would be places like trailheads, some of the boat access points that aren't currently open, things like that. Over a longer period of time, folks will look at camping and more developed sites. So that's sort of the general notion. We won't look at everything that's within the scenic area. However, one way that you could think about it is that the majority, I brought with me my notes from state parks and the Corps. Most of the boat park ramps would open. In the East Gorge, that'll probably be East Meyer, Wyeth, Post Canyon, Rowena Crest, and the state trail from the Dalles to Cascade Locks. So those are the day use kinds of sites that we're looking at opening, likely next Wednesday. The Corps already opened some of the access for fishing. And so they're probably going to be more phased, and some of their more developed camping and visitor centers will be at a delayed point. So again, think of this as phasing: day use, then eventually move to camping, and then to the more developed sites. The other piece that we're looking at is certain high use areas are going to be definitely delayed. Places like the waterfall corridor on the west end of the scenic area, places like Multnomah Falls, we're still trying to figure out how do we approach those and still provide for the public health needs that we have. So that's a brief synopsis of what we're looking at. We have tried to coordinate in both Oregon and Washington because, as you all know, and particularly are a part of, anything that happens in one state affects the other state. We think we have general alignment and support from the county commissioners. The biggest feedback that we got was people are really focused on public health. That is their driver. They care about the economic piece. However, it's not necessarily easing access so that we get people in to spend money, more so they get that psychological value and the respite that comes from being able to recreate. So we've heard that. We've heard also one of the larger concerns is around restroom facilities. And I think you all will have an approach to that. And then the other piece becomes sort of, if you choose not to ease restrictions, how do you deal with the fact that people are beginning to come? So that's the kinds of things that we've talked about. And again, we've had a couple of coordination meetings with county commissioners from 9 different counties at one time, 7 port directors, 10 or 11 city mayors, and 6 different sheriff's offices. So that's where we chose to get the input from. One of the challenges is, how do you message? So if you folks were to choose to move forward, what's different for you versus, say, why are we waiting a little bit longer? And one of the things that I think is very different is the type of recreation, as well as the setting that you all operate in. So something for you to consider. I think the other piece that I would share with you is the Gifford Pinchot Forest north of White Salmon and Stevenson chose to open their day use sites last Friday. And although it was a little earlier timing than the rest of us, part of their approach was around the eruption and the recognition of all the access that people were going to make there. In talking with Sheriff Brown over in Skamania County, even the places they were choosing to close, they had problems with people choosing to be there. So they definitely had an experience where when they eased the restrictions, people went where they wanted to be at. On the flip side, the Mount Hood National Forest to the south of the scenic area and the south of Hood River, they're looking at sometime towards the end of next week, probably later than we're talking about. But they're working on getting access to the day use sites. So I guess the piece that I would share is we're all trying to operate in concert. And what we've agreed is that operating in concert does not necessarily mean that everything happens coincidentally. So the other piece we're trying to do is have sort of some common and shared messaging. So with that, again, the piece I would share with you all as you consider it is what your environment is, what people are likely to do anyway, what is the public health situation currently in Hood River County and your public health officer and the input that we've gotten, and then what other kinds of safety issues arise should you choose to ease restrictions. And that's been one of the things we've been talking about is the elements that go with COVID-19 are one issue for us to address, and we don't want to lose sight of the broader perspective of what are all the safety considerations and whether you choose to ease restrictions or keep them in place. So with that, I will stop. I can answer questions as you have your dialogue. I just wanted to provide you that context.
And thank you for that. Could I ask one clarifying question? In your discussions with Sheriff English and Sheriff Brown and others, is there a concern that if there's even a limited opening that there isn't the capability for emergency?
So that's a great question. And what the sheriffs are trying to do, I think, is recognize the reality of the situation. So for example, Sheriff Brown would rather have things open at this point. And the reason for that is people are making choices to go places that are closed. And so the opportunity for search and rescue happens whether we've eased restrictions or not. So for him, the piece is that he would like to see it open sooner and as much as possible, so that people will spread out and not be drawn to any one specific area. In our conversations with Sheriff English, he's in support of that. Sheriff Brown tried to coordinate with Sheriff English, Sheriff Songer, and Sheriff McGill so that all 4 counties on the eastern end of the gorge had some alignment.
Thank you.
They all do have resource issues. That's not gone away, but that's kind of how they're approaching it.
Thank you.
Andrew?
So I think my internet connection is a bit unstable, so I'll just leave that for John and the commissioners to discuss. I think if there's interest in discussing a sort of limited opening, we can do that. If there isn't, then we'll follow your direction.
Okay, anybody, would anybody like to start out on the conversation?
Well, I'll jump in, and it's good to see you again, Lynn. It's been a while. Yeah. I'm looking at the recommendation you had, or the suggestion that you had, Michael, and I think what you're suggesting is we allow people to the event site, but we do not allow anyone to launch or land from there. Is that correct?
Thanks for clarifying that. This memo was done on Friday, and it was before I understood that more information about the relative openings that were occurring. I had thought that there were further openings at the time. To get to your question, this is a tough one. There isn't any sandbar left.
Right.
So if we're providing access to the event site, then I think we would have to be allowing launch and land, which means the flight deck. I've talked to Mike Stroud at CGW2, and they would be willing to have experienced people there in the flight deck, which they've done before, to basically allow an opportunity for people to get out on the water and come back in safely, but not linger, not gather.
Do we know, I'm assuming Waterfront Park will remain closed?
Yes, in fact, Rachel said today that they're putting up snow fencing because they've had people starting to gather there.
Yeah.
Michael, Commissioner Strike, what's Rachel's position? You spoke with her today. What did she feel about us opening it up?
We didn't talk about this. I didn't talk to her. In fact, it was just an email exchange. They've had a lot of interest in opening up their launch site for windsurfing, and at this point they are not allowing that to happen.
Michael, what target group are we targeting? What user group are we targeting? Are we utilizing locals to access the event site, or out-of-town users? And if out-of-town users, how are we going to police that?
Well, it's absolutely local kiteboarders. And I'm not pushing in this direction, but just so for your information, the message still outward to the Portland market is that the gorge, we want you to come, but not right now. If there was a modest opening of the event site, it would be targeted just at locals and sort of a relief valve. There is access going on to the water now. It happens at the Spit and it happens at the swim beach. So one kind of counter concern is that by not allowing a little bit more room for people to move, it could concentrate activity at those small and more problematic locations. And I guess I just point out the wind and weather. The weather forecast is good for the weekend. The wind forecast is not good, which of course is necessary for kiteboarding.
So if we do a soft opening for locals only, how are we going to enforce that for out-of-towners not to have access?
We can't. It would simply be a messaging. The CG2A has basically a members only blast list or list of, and it would be a messaging out that this is for locals, and the message, that particular message that it's available in a limited way would only be to that smaller group. You can't guarantee that, others won't come for sure.
Michael, is this the only launch site we have not open on the Oregon side in our county?
To my knowledge, yes. Daryl, is that correct?
Well, I don't believe that Rowena actually falls into Wasco County. So that would be Viento isn't open. That launch is still closed. And Rooster Rock, that falls on the other side as well. So I guess it would just be Viento. They are closed.
So there's different variations on if one were considering a sort of soft or limited opening. Maybe the most dramatic is not to open the parking lot, perhaps to open lot 1 so that clearly, then the restrooms aren't open. So the message would be, you don't park there, but you can park back at the event site, walk through, and then launch and land only. The other alternative is to just do cones in every other space and we can enforce that or try to limit the capacity of the site. But this comes down to people's self-awareness and frankly, mostly self-policing.
Michael, I got a couple comments and a couple questions on this one. I think policing would be very important, so I'm going to ask you how specifically we're going to do that. I do think if the hook and the spit are going to be open, that opening the event site, spacing out cars every other spot, perhaps only allowing those with passes, which not universally, but in a lot of ways will limit it to locals. But spacing out the parking there and on our parking on First Street as well is a good idea and a smart idea, and also will help to, like you said, spread people out. I'm looking at the hook right now, and it's a line of cars. I mean, the entire hook is a line of cars right at this moment. I'm looking at it. So spreading these people out, I think it's a good idea, and I think we can do it. But I am curious about how specifically we're going to police not only parking, but also crowds gathering, which is not appropriate at the event site. Especially anytime we're not supposed to be doing that. But now, if we are going to allow some launching and recovery there, it's not the time or the place for a picnic. So how are we going to enforce that? My second question is going to be on restrooms. I see that ours are staying closed, but you proposed getting some porta potties. I read the governor's guidance today, and we'll have to commit to cleaning those at least twice a day and providing all the needed everything for them. How are we planning to do that?
So your second question first, we own, I think it's, John, are you there? Yeah, 6 porta potties, is that correct?
That's correct.
So we could locate 2 of them, say at the event site. There is a service to clean those. We don't do it ourselves, and we would have to make sure that they are able and willing to clean twice a day per the governor's orders. John, I don't know if that's possible with our vendor.
Yeah, that would stress his operations to the limits. Even once a day is gonna be a whole change of his operation.
So that's not possible.
Yeah, twice a day is probably not possible.
That's guidance from the state, though. I think we're gonna, if we put out porta potties, we have to do it. So that we can't do that, which is kind of, we have to do it if it goes out.
Mark Hickok here, still on the call. There is something in the state's guidance that states that if you cannot clean it twice a day, you can put a notice on the porta potty or on the bathroom that says to the public that it is not being cleaned twice a day. So it's just a noticing thing. So it is possible for you to do that. We have chosen not to do that and to keep our restrooms closed, but there is guidance and it is possible for you to do that.
And this
Your
is Lynn.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Michael, I just wanted to add one more piece to that. I agree with what Mark said. It's strongly suggested on the twice a day cleaning. One of our challenges with the natural environment that people talked about is the restroom is only as clean as the most recent person who used it. And so even cleaning twice a day, one of the things we don't want people to have is this impression that somehow they're safe because you're cleaning it twice a day. And so the other piece, though, that came up when we've gotten input from the public health people is the restroom issue, and the ability for folks to clean their hands is definitely a thing of concern with the public health folks. Separate from whatever the guidance is that's published, that's the one that I hear the most feedback from them about.
We do not have the hand washing stations that I believe are required in this situation, which is pump station and hand sanitizer.
Lynn, if I could ask you a question about, you said there was pressure at Gifford Pinchot as well as Mount Hood. You know, was anybody check where those people were coming from?
So that's a great question. One of the So on the Mount Hood, they have not eased restrictions yet. The big thing that happened was Timberline starting access last week. They sold out on day one, they sold out in 3 minutes. So a lot of that was outside the area. On the Gifford Pinchot, a lot of it does come from the metropolitan area, similar to what we had here at Post Canyon last weekend. They encountered a group of 35 folks from the Portland area. And so I think the challenge becomes with although we're all messaging, we love you and we want you to come back, just not right now. They're also hearing this message of recreation is a good thing. And if you think about it, the east side of the metro area is only 50 miles away from Hood River. And so people do see this as their neighborhood. So I think you can expect that if you do any kind of advertising, people will be out from that area and possibly from east of us as well.
Lynn, have you guys talked about the Oregon coast absorbing some of this get out of town demand? I think for a lot of people in the metro region, it's either the coast or the gorge. And so if one is open and the other is not, is that part of the discussion at all?
That's a great question, Genevieve. We have not been trying to have a shared discussion with the coast. It's actually been complicated enough just within the gorge. So we have not looked at it from that angle. What we've mostly tried to do is, again, go from the Gifford Pinchot down through the gorge into the Mount Hood, and then the east to west. That's something we can look into. I think the other piece that may begin to affect us is, I believe Clark County is going to be looking at moving towards phase 2 in Washington. And both Multnomah and Clackamas are talking about when and under what conditions they would look for phase 1. And any of those changes will also affect, not for this weekend, but will begin to affect. It's partly why the North Coast felt so strongly originally about don't just reopen everything. And some of what led to us having these conversations because of the impact that they experienced.
Seaside is opening up their beach access points. So I know a lot of the counties are kind of going at it county by county with the phase 1 requirements.
Right.
Beaches had always been open. It was just the access to the beaches that were in question.
Right.
So if I could, Ben, I don't think I answered your first question there. That was policing
Yeah,
enforcement.
thank you.
Pretty limited. We will have, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, one staff person now starting this weekend on weekend duty. That person could go through the event site, and if the enforcement is about parking, that's a tough one. If the enforcement is reminders about people that might be gathering or crowds, that could probably be done. But we're, aside from hopefully a effective comment that a staff person can make, our really only outlet is to call the police if there's a real issue. I think the point here is that can the event site be open? A question, can the event site be open partially that allows locals launching and landing without crowds gathering? And if we can answer that affirmatively, then you might consider it. If we can't answer it yes, then the answer would be no.
And I would add bathrooms, Michael. I don't know how we can open to a large crowd, which even if it's just our locals, we would anticipate, hundreds of people, and not have bathrooms.
It would be very problematic to do that, yeah.
And we could bounce the bathroom question back to the associations, say, we're there for you guys getting on the water, but this is what it's got to be, and we don't have what it takes.
John, you would look to our maintenance company. Would they be willing to do something like that?
Absolutely. I'll be meeting with Joetta tomorrow afternoon to walk through our bathrooms to get a quote to tell us what one round of cleaning would cost. And Joetta, she takes care of all of our port properties currently, and has had to go through quite a process to be able to keep her workers safe and come up with a safe operation for doing this. So yeah, I think I should have some numbers for us by end of the week, I would think.
But would she even be available to do it twice a week, twice a day on weekends?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're talking about those joint agency agreements, but she's already meeting with the city today to discuss taking care of their restroom. So with us having her on contract already, that's something we could make happen, and she's very willing to put together the staff to do so.
Well, that would weigh heavily in my judgments.
You know, the more I think about it, I'm just not comfortable opening for this weekend. I think there's too much risk involved. I think there's going to be an awful lot of people wanting to come here, and that I don't think we're going to be able to keep away. I think I would prefer to look, even if it's sometime later next week, to try to open, say, along with what Lynn's suggesting for the National Scenic Area. But I don't think we should try to do that on the event site this weekend. I think it would be inviting a lot of trouble.
Michael, did you mention that it's going to be nice weather, but not good wind conditions?
Well, that's the forecast that I've seen. It's pretty far out, so you don't know about wind, but if there's no wind, there's no kiting.
Well, the biggest problem though is if there's no wind, there's gathering.
Well, true.
People standing around talking.
Yeah, that could be.
The tough one is if we still have to remember the hook and the spit are open. And so if people are going to congregate, they will be more densely packed down there if the event site is not open sooner or later here. I agree, it needs to be done safely. And yeah, thinking about a busy weekend, keeping it closed in one sense makes sense. And in another one, I'm like, well, they're just going to go, more people are just going to go somewhere else. So having some of our access open and some closed is just encouraging groups.
Commissioner Shepherd, what do you think about if we have the event site closed, but having lot 1 open for pass holders? So our message is the event site's closed. The people have already bought their passes. My concern would be that the hook and the spit in Marina Beach being open, there's going to be a lot of crowding because those are more local spots. You have to be a little bit better sailor or kiter or paddler to go in those areas. You know, a lot of people on vacation or looking at the websites and everything maybe aren't as dialed in with the event site, but at least with lot 1, maybe it'll help spread people out, because it seems like the real core of what we're looking at is we need people spread out and not congregating. It's not a spot people would hang out. It's not that comfortable there, but then they could still walk and not be, just a thought.
Are you asking me specifically, Daryl?
Just because you were talking about that, and all commissioners, I am just curious, to be open to something like that. What are your thoughts on that? I've had a lot of people contact me with all kinds of different ideas on open, close, halfway, partway, but you know, just putting public safety at the top. We are going to have a lot of people come, I believe, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, Daryl, I don't have a problem with the event site parking lot being open itself for pass holders if we space out parking and have proper, services and proper enforcement down there. I don't know that lot 1 versus the event site is going to matter if it's pass holders only, because that would tend to, I would hope, be more local in nature. So.
Well, maybe we should call the question the Commissioner Merriweather's a clear no. What do other commissioners think?
If I were to step in, I guess I'd come down on no as well. I don't think we can do it with services adequate to the crowd that we expect. If we could address those services, I'd change my mind.
Yeah, it's a good point, John. I think no is easier to enforce than a soft opening.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
true.
I'm leaning towards no myself. I just think that we're not prepared for it, and the weather's not going to be ideal for the sport itself, and that means people will be gathering, standing around, waiting for it to build. This is exactly what we don't want to have happening: large groups standing around. So I'm voting no. Maybe later next week.
I mean, actually, we're soft open now at the Spit and the Swim Beach and off the end of the Hook. All those are legal and accessible.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I think the event site's going to draw more out of town users than any of those other two locations.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy access, drive right to it. Everybody knows it's a household name. Everybody refers to it the first time coming here. So I think the other two locations are a soft opening, but they're not well known.
And they also are really only used for launching and landing. They really aren't gathering places like the event site is. People can come there and congregate without getting in the water. The others are more specific for getting in the water. So if the wind's not up, I don't think that there would be as many people trying to.
Okay, Ben, you with that?
I don't disagree with anything my fellow commissioners are saying. I think we do need to have since we don't have a date in place, get a pretty firm plan on services, John, costs involved, and the ability to provide them, safety and enforcement, because I would like to get to a yes as soon as we can, do so with all of those three stipulations being obviously requirements, I think, for all of us. So that's okay with me. Yeah.
Just a quick plea from staff in terms of any plan, a nice, at least 1 week lead time for messaging would be really helpful. The more complicated and as Lynn said, make it real simple. If it can't be real simple, then we need more time to be able to develop signage and get articles in the paper and whatnot to really explain the terms of use of these sites. And so, maybe discuss tentative date certain tonight, and then John and Daryl and Michael and I can maybe come together, formulate a plan and feed it back to you going forward.
Michael, if I make a suggestion, I'd like to have you maybe contact the city and the county and work together with those two agencies too, with an opening date, so they're on the same page and we work in harmony with those two agencies.
Yeah, good point. We're talking every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, and we'll do it tomorrow. I think it's going to be really hard to hold this back too far into June. So I would suggest that based on particularly what Ben said, let's get a game plan together. We'll find out costs. We'll prepare for what we can for enforcement. We'll make sure we're in coordination, at least timing wise, with other agencies. And I would say tentatively aim for the middle to the end of next week.
Yeah, and to your point, Genevieve, I don't think we need to message it. We can let people find out on their own that it's available. I'm more concerned that we get some preparatory work out front so we can absorb some level of shockwave. And if we're blown over by it, then we have to close it. Give us some prep time and don't advertise, just let people find out and see how big that reaction is.
I'd also note before we close this topic, several businesses that operate down at the event site. Daryl's done a great job communicating with them, but we're going to have to keep that in mind as well when we open that. Does that mean that we are allowing access for them as well? And how is that possible? Daryl's going to need some forewarning on that because she's going to get asked right away.
And Commissioner Shepherd, I've been in touch with every one of the, what I would refer to as the stakeholders down there, and we talk weekly. So it's going to be, getting a feel for the timing of when the commissioners are comfortable, if and when opening the event site. And then at that time, go from there. But they are all poised and pretty much ready to go when we are, and they are all keeping up with what the state is feeding out, because I've let them know that they are going to have to be in line with whatever the state guidelines are. And so they've, again, have been, each of them working on that. So once we decide that we're going to get it open, then they're on deck for that. So be good with that. And as far as the signage goes, I have had a group of the local kiters help me out well, and I do have signs ready to go up for the event site that will help with the crowding and the traffic flow, as far as keeping it so people are not having to be so tightly together. I have not put any of those up yet because we haven't wanted it to be like the event site is open, but John and his crew are also teed up and ready to put those up when we get the word. So I think, and combined with the restrooms, that if next week looks good to have the other pieces ready, we can get our part ready, and I can help Genevieve with the language for letting people know what's going on.
I just wanted to make sure they knew we were forgetting them too, as we talk about kiting all night.
And showing them the love.
So staff will tentatively plan for or create the game plan for a reopening by the end of next week, and we'll push that back to the commission middle of next week to have a check-in point and brief you on where other agencies are at and make sure there's no objection. Does that sound like a game plan?
Yes, that sounds like a good idea to me. I support that.
Yes, I concur.
Okay. Excellent.
Okay, that moves us on to reports.
Lynn, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Oh, I'm
Take care.
sorry, Lynn. Thank you for coming.
No problem.
Bridge replacement?
Yes, does anybody want to hear from Kevin?
I do have a couple of items that weren't in the report. One, we are coming up on the second cost to complete analysis, looking at where we're under on line items, where we're a little bit over. If you recall in the past, I mentioned that there is a level 2 archaeological survey being requested, not just by ODOT now, but there's some interest by SHPO and the Umatilla to take a look at that site. So that's an area, but that cost that we receive from the new archaeologist is quite a bit less than what we were anticipating. We were hearing some of the costs were going to be potentially 6 figures, and this cost that we just received is below 45,000. So, and there is some money in the existing budget for that work, but I anticipate that I will need to come back and get, bring it to your attention that we're going to probably pull, 35 to 40 out of that contingency line to do that level 2 archaeology work. So I think it's a good sign that it wasn't a 6-figure effort, and we've communicated to the property owner, and I think he understands what it's going to look like and the impacts there. Complicating it just a little bit is the city of White Salmon is doing water line work over on that site, and the current site in question is being used to store water line pipe and is currently fenced off, but that should be removed by June. The other item that is that was not in your packet was the draft agenda for the next bi-state bridge replacement working group. And so I included the past agenda and some of the talking points from that meeting. But we did get a date set up for Friday, May 29th at 1 p.m. It'll be a Zoom meeting. Senator King has asked to sit in on that and to talk a little bit about some of the legislative issues that Brad noted in his discussion. There's a real interest in the working group talking about how to formalize the working group, to how are decisions to be made. As we look through the milestones over the next 6 to 18 months, it's really a question about, to what degree is it more just kind of consensus or head nodding versus, this regional agreement to, study P3s versus other funding. So one of the things that Steve Siegel is going to be doing in advance of that meeting, will be presenting is, what are some of the milestones that this working group is going to be looking at, and what level of either consensus or direction do the individual agencies need to make moving forward. So I think we're going to be, staff is really going to be listening to the working group, answering their questions, sharing with them where we think the consensus items or decision items will be in the next few months. But that should take up a pretty good chunk of that agenda. We're still looking at the governance structure. There was a little bit of a timeout that the working group felt that the level of detail that Siegel was sharing was very comprehensive and extensive. And we all know Siegel's breadth of knowledge and expertise. So we're trying to figure out if there's a way to kind of streamline some of that information and maybe boil it down so there's a little bit more clarity quicker for the working group. And then just the other item is just maybe ramping up the frequency of those working group meetings instead of from a monthly basis to maybe either every 2 or 3 weeks. But I think that there's really good progress moving forward. Just a real shout out to Klickitat County and Commissioner Dave Souter. I've been on the phone with him several times over the last couple of weeks as we assuage and keep Gordy over in their public works department happy with this build grant application. Poor Gordy over at Klickitat Public Works was worried that he was going to end up having to develop an RFP for engineering services for 15% bridge design. And he was like, time out. But we were able to kind of explain to him that, really what we're looking for Klickitat County is to take the lead in kind of preparing the engineering selection committee and a long-term technical advisory committee. So pretty important functions, but not a high cost time or dollar wise. So John, coming back to the working group, if you have any comments or want to clarify any of the things that I pulled from that last meeting, I'd be interested in hearing your points of view.
Just to your very first comments, to my knowledge, nobody on the working group has gone back to their parent agency yet with any kind of proposal or even report on what kind of governance structure is being contemplated. So I think we could anticipate that coming, maybe after this next meeting. I hope it's time to get that discussion happening at the parent organizations.
Well, that's a good point. And I did send a email to Jerry. I know he's been busy just talking about his thoughts on various governance legalities. So I'm sure we'll be able to follow up on that at some point, Jerry. Anything anything else in the board packet regarding bridge replacement? Anything in there? All right, well, we're still plugging away. I am planning on visiting the tribal treaty fishing site in early June to take some photos of where the new bridge will be, what it will look like from that site. So who knows? I've been away from Hood River for over 8 weeks now, so I'm kind of itching to come back and check in with you guys.
You might forget the way.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. It's pretty well marked. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kevin. Then Michael, that brings up the director's report.
Okay, a lot to cover. I'll go fast. First of all, thanks to staff for the hard work that's going on during this challenging time. I want to point out Maria Diaz, who continues to do the minutes and ably so, and she's on the meeting today, and she only has a year and 3 quarters to go in her meeting minute commitment. Thank you, Maria. And then I also want to just talk about and mention the front office. With the AET going out, we've had a really significant increase, and it's sort of episodic, but a real punch of phone calls that come in, and people are surprised by the bill they received. They have questions about it. They want to know what to do, but you have Marcella and you have Yana and you have Esperanza just doing terrific work up front, and I want to thank them for that. I also want to just thank the commission for the discussion at the last meeting and the decision to maintain the compensation policy the way it is, at least for now. That was well received by everyone here, and I think we much appreciate that decision. Ex-Commissioner Bob Nicholson passed away on the 8th. He was affiliated with Westside Fire. I was able to meet him and have lunch with him several times. He was a commissioner from 1981 to 1997, whose tenure I think was only exceeded by John Weber and perhaps Commissioner Strike, although he could go on for a decade longer or more. Typically in those situations, we send a $100 check to the chosen charity, or in this case, Westside Fire, as a contribution in Mr. Nicholson's memory. There is in your packet attachment, which is our safe work practices. That is intended just for your information. That continues to be updated both with a situational description and also continual update to our office safe practices in response to COVID. That is something that all of us as staff have reviewed, and it will be updated as we learn more and as things evolve. I just want to mention that we are intending to make an application for reimbursement for some of our direct costs to the state. There's an opportunity, and we have some definite out-of-pocket expenses, and Fred will be managing that. Anne continues to be involved with the Gorge Resiliency Team, and they are meeting weekly, and there was a very large and well-attended training session that occurred via Zoom last week. And then Anne in particular continues to work with tenants on their situations, our port tenants and their individual situations and what they're dealing with in response to COVID. Esperanza will be leaving us at the port. She'll be relocating to Mexico, but thankfully she's given us time until early July to make that move. We do have a front office position advertised, as well as a toll staff member or a toll position open and being advertised. And Daryl wanted me to mention that dogs off leash continue to be a problem, and she's been in contact with animal control at the Hood River County. Picnic shelter has been barricaded. This is the one in the Marina Park. We've had a transit or several transit have been taking up residence there overnight. So John has put up snow fencing around it all. And there continues to be discussion with American Cruise Lines. They still want to get back in the gorge. They still want to. They're trying to look to open and continue with cruises. They've got a lot of different jurisdictions to deal with. I put them in touch with Nate Stites at the state, because even Nate was stumped about what to do in this situation with a floating hotel, restaurant, buses. It's got everything challenging about it. But I will say that American Cruise Lines gave us a very, very detailed, I thought very well done practices or safe cruising practices that was very robust and detailed, so that they're professionals and they're doing the best they can and trying to find a way to get back cruising on the Columbia. Good report on Jensen building. The environmental drilling took place. There really was nothing, thankfully, profoundly concerning about the condition of the soils. It is, though, likely to lead to a couple different requirements. We'll see what DEQ pushes back on us, but probably a groundwater restriction and a contaminated soil management plan. So a noted limitation either in the deed or otherwise that would notify downstream buyers, if that ever occurred, that there was some historical contamination on the site. Interesting enough, they did find some hazardous materials in one of the catch basins. And I can't remember which one it is, but that one oddly is upstream of where we thought the most of the impacts were, but that will need to be dealt with on a specific hazardous disposal waste protocol. Ann can report later in executive session, but we do expect some tenants to be leaving, to having to vacate their space. So the impacts of this pandemic will unfold over time. And that's not unexpected, but of course concerning. And Ann wanted me to report that there's still some interest in properties, and she showed the Walden offices, or the ex-Walden offices, on the 15th. Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you for an update on Tappanee at the airport and the FAA grant, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So Tappanee moved in on Monday and began work that day, yesterday. Tomorrow they'll be saw cutting into Tucker Road. So there'll be traffic stops and flaggers, and they'll be connecting to the sewer tomorrow. So they are moving quickly, and we worked through some initial permitting issues, and everything's going smoothly now. As far as the FAA grant goes, we're still expecting to get the grant agreement either towards the end of this week or beginning of next week. They haven't honed in on a final date yet, but we're anticipating getting that, and hopefully being able to bring that to you for approval and execution on June 2nd.
And thanks, Ann.
I thought they had decided, I thought Tappanee had decided not to start until we had that grant in hand.
Well, remember, they're the contractors for both the Connect 6 project as well as the North Apron project. So the work they're doing now is for the Connect 6 project.
Thank you.
And Ann, could you just brief everyone on the FAA? They're going to pay the full cost of the North Apron rehab project without going through our AP funds.
Yep. So just quickly, if you'll remember, there are two types of funds that come from the FAA. One is called the Airport Improvement funds, which come directly from the FAA, and you have to go through a grant process for those. The other is goes through the state, and those are called non-primary entitlement funds. And those come to the airport on an annual basis in the amount of $150,000. So before the coronavirus situation and the CARES Act, the port was going to have to basically the project for the North Apron was over the original AIP funds budget. And we were going to have to reimburse ourselves on an annual basis from the $150,000 from the NPEs for about 4 to 5 years. So now what the FAA has done is not only have they made the grant 100% grant with no match from the port, but they've also covered the entire project with AIP funds. What this does is it frees up the annual NPE funds of $150,000 for us to use on other projects. So that's That's really good news. That pays for design, that pays for construction, that pays for construction management, and the port does not have to reimburse itself for the next 5 years. And we have those funds available for other projects.
Yeah, that was really good news. Thank you, Ann. Just lastly on the bridge, John, are you still there? Yeah, so John is now becoming a full-fledged bridge lift operator along with a couple of other folks. Louis will be leaving us at some point in the next 6 to 8 months. Louis was the primary bridge operator when we needed to lift it. And for 3 consecutive Friday mornings at what time, John? 5 o'clock in the morning, he's lifting the bridge along with Ryan and Steve. Is that right?
That's correct.
So we'll have 3 full-on bridge lift operators, fully qualified, in a couple weeks now. Just quickly, pretty sort of good news on the preliminary analysis of the load rating. WSP's analysis was submitted to ODOT. They agreed with that analysis and they pushed it back to their consultant, David Evans and Associates, to essentially reassess some component pieces of the bridge so that the one truss they use is, and gusset plates and the truss, et cetera, were not the weak link that then they applied to all the other trusses. So that'll cycle back through DEA and we'll get from that a better idea of what are the weak points and what specifically can be done if the commission chose to reinforce those weak points and then restore the weight limit. I will say though that I don't see any way to avoid the weight limit. I think it's coming. I think this year it may miss harvest, which would be good, but I will know more as DEA's work takes place. And then lastly, the AET rollout's occurring. It's well underway. We now have a better line on our year-to-year traffic volumes. So Fred, if you could give us an update on those items.
So we have gone live with the AET. We've sent the first invoices out, and so we're getting exactly what we thought we would get. We get a higher volume of phone traffic, and that's occurring. But with that, and I want to discuss it since we're looking at the waterfront opening up, but we also have the capability of, and we can just open for discussion. This can wait till next time as well, but we are working on a plan. If you want to have the toll booth opened up, we're looking at June 1st. If you guys want to, we have that capability to put the toll collectors back in. One of the issues that was there was that because the toll collectors aren't 6 feet apart, we would have to change the shifts up to where one person would be in the booth for a shorter amount of time, and they'd be able to do that. So one person would handle traffic, and you could do that for like over a period of 2 to 3 hours, and then another shift would come in. So I don't know if you are open to having a discussion a little bit on this, or do you want to postpone it to next time? But we're thinking possibly opening it up in early June or June 1st. What do you think? What do y'all think?
Would that mean that the toll goes from $5 back down to $2?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're collecting the toll, it would, but the $5 would always be for a run through, a true violator that would run through the outside lanes.
And we want to catch them.
Yeah, so, and that's the intent of the system, how we designed it to begin with. But if someone came through and let's say they didn't have a credit card, we wouldn't give them an envelope. We just tell them, we'd give them a little insert to say, here's the instructions to make your payment. And then they can make the payment before the invoice ever gets kicked out to them with the $3 charge. So.
Yeah, to me, the sooner the better, if it can be done safely.
Okay. So we're working on, work with the toll collectors. I think that everyone believes that it can be done, and June 1st would be a good date. I know they're looking at the waterfront opening in around that same time period. So I think we could actually do this. It's not a long-term thing. It'd be for a month or two, but hopefully we eventually get back to normal. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Sooner the better. We can do it
All right.
safely.
Commissioner
I agree.
Shepherd?
Yeah, I agree. But unlike the event site, this is something we probably would want to communicate as much as possible to the community.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. That's all I had.
Fred, could you just give everyone an update on the traffic volumes?
Oh, well, the traffic volumes are slowly coming up. They're still below last year. And depending upon the day, we've had a couple days where they're just as much or more than last year, but on an aggregate basis, they're still in that above that 20% mark from last year. So, but one of the things, some of the new numbers I will share with you. In a previous meeting, I talked about the losses. There's sort of, three types of losses. One is the fact that you have a vehicle that runs through and the cameras don't pick it up. That's a loss. The other loss would be the fact that when DMV sends the information back, they don't have the information. They don't have John Doe living at, for a license plate number. So that's the other. And then the third loss is the collection loss everyone's familiar with. You send someone a bill, they don't pay for it. Well, the first two losses, just for this last week, and this is just for this last week, right around 3.8%. So of all the traffic that went through there, went over our bridge that was related to the license plate recognition system, we had about a 3.8% loss, meaning we couldn't pick up the license plate number or DMV couldn't find the address. So not as, from my viewpoint, I thought it was lower than I was expecting, but that was okay. That's all the information I have right now.
That completes my report, unless there are questions. John? John, you're still muted.
My screen has gone. I've lost my screen somehow. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can't see anybody anymore, but Commissioner Strike, this is the committee reports, and can we hear about the URA?
Okay, thank you, President Everett. Last Wednesday, May 13th, we had the Hood River Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. And first place of order was to elect a chairman, which we did. And then we had the budget message. And then we went over each Columbia Cascade District, Waterfront District, and the Heights District as far as the financial budget for each one of the districts. What we discussed in the budget, there was no amendments to the budget, so we did make a motion to approve the 2021 budget. It was approved unanimously. And then our second motion of the day was in regard to ORS 457455. It's a state statute that allows a one-time that you can suspend the division of tax revenue given back to the districts. Little history behind urban renewal. We have 8 overlaying districts. We have a district that consists of the Waterfront, the Heights, and Columbia Cascade. And within that, we have 8 different districts. City of Hood River County, 911 Communication, Columbia Gorge Education, Hood River County Library, Hood River Parks and Recs, Hood River County Transit, and the Port of Hood River. Those are the 8 that receive funds from those districts. when the statute was written, it allows us as an urban renewal board to suspend that. And so the motion was made and approved to suspend any tax revenues generated for 2021 will go back to those 8 overlayment divisions and districts. So we'll receive some money back, not a great amount, but we'll receive some money back. And then the budget was approved. It'll come back in June to be adopted if there's no contested constituents in regard to the approved budget. Another thing that was brought to our attention from the board was maybe urban renewal helping out local businesses in some aspect. And we discussed it and we come to the conclusion that we need to wait another 30 days and discuss it, collect more data, and just get a good feel for it and make sure that the virus does not have a second surge and not get the cart in front of the horse. So we're going to wait and watch for 30 days and come back and revisit that. But that's about the extent of the meeting. It was a good meeting, and that's a one-time thing that we can do for suspend the revenue funds, and then they'll take up in 21, 22. Back to you, John.
Hey, thank you.
Commissioner Everett,
Yes.
could I request that we switch action item B with action item A, as we have Sarah Sullivan with Gorge Grown Network here to answer any questions you have for action item B?
Yes, of course. Sarah, thanks for coming. I did want to ask Commissioner Merriweather, do you have any update on the Emergency Operations Center?
Sure, I'll be brief. As you all know, I think the county was approved by the governor's office and the Oregon Health Authority to enter phase 1 of the recovery plan. There were 31 counties in Oregon that applied. Well, there were 31 approved. There were 33 that applied, but 2 were denied because of they were unable to demonstrate a reduction in the number of hospitalized cases of COVID-19. That's Marion and Polk, I think. A telling thing for us, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier, the 3 counties that did not apply are Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas. So the 3 large urban Portland metro counties to our immediate west were the 3 that did not try to open. So that again puts more pressure on others. I know that all the coast counties did apply to be able to reopen, but there are still some local ordinances in place that prevent a lot of the lodging from being utilized, similar to what we have here. The hotels and motels are still closed in most of those, at least northern coast communities. We did see an increase in visitation this last weekend, given the circumstances with the reopening. I did sort of a windshield survey of a lot of the businesses, wineries, restaurants, things like that in the community over the course of the weekend. I would say the majority were still not open. But the ones that I did see, this was very encouraging. The ones that I did see that were open were very mindful of the recommended guidelines for opening. Tables were distanced, employees wore PPE and that sort of thing. So that was encouraging to me, just from what I observed. One of the things that, and as you may know, I'm the business liaison for the EOC. One of the things that is looming and is going to be important over the next couple of weeks is the surge in migrant farm labor that will be coming into the area. Primarily, initially, it will be in Wasco County, with cherries coming up. But there are a lot of people working hard on that. I asked a question earlier of our lobbyist in Salem about what is the disposition of a request for additional funds to protect the migrant workers, including PPE and additional sanitation facilities, potentially temporary housing, because in some of the facilities that provide housing, the distance requirements are going to make it impossible, if not very difficult, to fill them up. So there's going to have to be additional housing. So those are well underway. And over the next couple of weeks, looking into June, things will need to be set up as folks start to arrive in relatively large numbers. So for the most part, I think the situation in this county is really in pretty good shape comparatively. We've had, I think at this point, 11 confirmed cases and 2 more that are presumed, but not yet proven. But we have still no hospitalizations, and it appears to be flattening somewhat here. So that's an encouraging sign. That's the end of it.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah. And then action items, and we will switch. Sarah, thanks for coming again. Gorge, you want to lead the discussion?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Sarah, for coming tonight. In your packets are 2 things: a support letter for a USDA planning grant for Gorge Grown, and also a partnership letter for the same grant request. So Gorge Grown, I think many of you are probably familiar with what they do here in the Gorge. Sarah can explain some of that to you, but they are applying for a grant to support looking at different ways that the local food distribution system can be improved. Part of that plan may include a local food enterprise center or diverse or local food enterprise centers in different locations around the Gorge. So Sarah has done an amazing job with the grant application. There's a couple 3 state level partners, as I understand it, and I believe a number of other local partners that have come on board. She's asking for the port to be involved on a pretty minimal basis. So about an hour a week for about a year is what the port has recommended that we could provide. No monetary commitment is required. And really this is a partnership and support role that the port could help play in this planning process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah for any questions. The grant is, I believe they're shooting for May 22nd for submitting the grant. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, and we're just looking for the board to either support with a letter of support and also hopefully with partnership for Gorge Grown. So any questions for Sarah would be great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all of your work. I can tell you just a little bit of what's inspired us to go for this grant, to give you a little bit more background. So I serve as executive director, Gorge Grown Food Network, and our mission is to build a resilient, inclusive food system that improves the health and well-being of our community. We primarily work with some of the smaller farmers and food producers in the Gorge. And just to give you a sense of the scope of our work, we manage 3 farmers markets in Hood River, Mosher, and Odell. And we also co-founded and support the other 8 farmers markets in the Gorge through our rural farmers market network. We also support schools and local food sourcing and fundraising and food distribution as the regional hub for Oregon Farm to School network. We provide fresh produce to 300 low-income food insecure families through our VeggieRx program through One Community Health. And we have a mobile farmers market, which is a van that we travel around the Gorge in and deliver fresh produce to 6 rural communities everywhere from Lyle to Cascade Locks. More broadly, and perhaps most relevant to this grant application, is we support about 150 local food businesses through what we call our Food Business Incubator program, with technical assistance and marketing and a new online sales platform and our annual buyer-seller networking event. So over the years, we've done a lot of assessment of what are the barriers to building a more robust, resilient local food system. And a lot of the farmers that we've polled, 109 that we surveyed in 2017, said that they were really interested in renting more cold storage space, in meat processing plant, commercial kitchen, fruit processing, canning, and then other kind of support infrastructure like a food broker to aggregate or distribute product, and that kind of thing. With COVID-19, we've seen just an incredible surge in the demand for local food. With our mobile market in April alone, we distributed as much food as we did last year. And it's just really obvious that we're at a point where we really need some more infrastructural support for our small local growers. So basically, this is a planning grant. It's a new bucket of funding through the USDA that's called the Regional Food System Program. Their request for proposals is a little bit vague. I think it's because they haven't administered this funding before. And we're really open to community input on what this looks like. It may be centralized, it may not be centralized, just as Anne said. And I guess I just want to be really transparent here. I don't know that much about the port in general, but I do know that you all probably get a lot of pressure around, I know, Lot 1 and all of the other properties. So I just want to say, we didn't reach out to you specifically as a property owner, but as another entity in the community that supports local business development. So this is not any pressure around land or finances or any of that. It's just our attempt to really include everyone who might be interested in a project like this. So I'm happy to take any questions or tell you more. I don't want to take up too much time.
Sarah, did you anticipate a retail aspect to it?
We could definitely see that. I mean, part of what I'm excited about is exploring various models around the Pacific Northwest. There's really simple type of food enterprise center or food hub out of Bellingham. That's just kind of a covered farmers market space that with garage doors that open in the summer. And they do have a revenue generating aspect of that center, which is more of an event space. There are lots of other models like the Pybus Market in Wenatchee or various hubs like the Red and Eco Trust that do have more of a retail aspect. So I'm not exactly sure. I would be hopeful that all of these things could be part of the process, but I think that's what the discussion will be about, what would be best for our community.
And you said 109 food producers?
109 are how many we'd surveyed to assess needs. I don't, that all of them haven't committed to this project, but those are certainly farmers and food businesses that are directly involved in our farmers markets and our work.
Could you highlight, I mean, are there meat raisers, produce raisers, fruit raisers? What kind of farmers are we talking about?
All of the above. Yeah, recently there is a group of 8 vegetable farmers that are forming what they're calling the Gorge Farmers Collective, and they are responding to limitations in their markets that have shut down, like the restaurants and other sales channels, by building an online platform. So that's one example, but a number of producers have also expressed need and support for meat processing. I would say the majority of those are in Klickitat County. So there may be some tricky issues, as you know, around moving food across state borders, but in any case, we work with all kinds of producers and would be hopeful that value-added producers could be involved too. We've talked about, a really mini Pike Place type market where maybe there's cheesemakers making cheese there and other kind of agritourism element. And again, I don't know where that might be or what that might look like, or if that would be the best thing to meet the needs, but that's where I guess we'd be involving the community stakeholders. I do have a letter of commitment from the Small Business Development Center, Business Oregon, and then MCED. The letter of commitment is a little different from the letter of support in that it is promising some staff time, but that's those entities have promised a variety of hours, like 10 to 50 for the project. So it's pretty flexible. Oregon State University and Washington State University are also signed on to be a part of this.
Okay, would we expect to get any reports back about progress and which direction is headed?
Yeah, absolutely. We're planning on quarterly reports, and then at the end of the project, which we're anticipating being just over a year for this initial planning project, we will do a public presentation. And I would also say that there is another part of the same funding source that is for implementation. So if we did get the planning grant, then the implementation grants are upwards of $1 million. And we also have some other private entities that are interested in investing in such a project. I'm part of a statewide network called the Oregon Community Food System Network. And that I serve as treasurer, and that includes EcoTrust and some of the bigger players in the local food system. So I'd be hopeful that we could try to leverage some of that funding in our relationships to bring more resources in general.
Thank you, it's exciting.
Any
other questions? Okay, in that case, any discussion on whether we would like to, well, let me give it back to you, Ann, because there's two different levels of participation.
Right. So, and Sarah, maybe you can clarify this too. So there's two levels of participation. We can sign up as a partner entity with the grant, or we can provide a letter of support. Or Sarah, would you like both of those things from the port?
I think either or, Anne. And whatever you all are comfortable. I have enough. They call it a letter of commitment for the partnership. But again, that sounds a little daunting, especially with the USDA government type grant. But really all it's asking is a commitment of staff time to engage in a project that you may or may not be involved with. So either way would be great. And I'd also understand if you didn't, I won't take it personally if you don't want to submit a letter, but I just really want you to be aware of the project.
Yeah, I would say then the action is either to authorize the partnership with Gorge Grown Food Network in support of the grant application. And if the board does not want to move that way, then authorize just the letter of support.
Commissioner Strike?
Yeah, I have no problem either. Definitely the letter of support. I have no problem with that at all.
And I'd support the partnership level personally. It's an hour a week, and it's particularly the value added agriculture and development of ag tourism in our region. I think it's just center stage of our mission statement. It's a counterbalance to tourism, and it's people that live here, and I'm a big supporter.
Yeah, man, I agree with Chair Everett. I think this is an important thing. I've been working at the food bank for the last month or so, distributing food, and the Oregon Food Bank is enduring a strain, getting enough food out. I think the more we're able to grow and produce and distribute within our local community, the better off we're going to be. I think this is a relatively benign way for us to partner with Gorge Grown to try to bring that about locally. And I support the partnership. And I would defer to Ann, to you, and to Michael with regard to the availability of the staff time for it. But if there is no objection or concern about that, I would support the partnership.
And
Commissioner
if you
Shepherd?
want me to answer, oh, sorry.
Yeah, if Ann has the time to commit to this, and we're not signing up for something else that I don't know about yet in the future by agreeing to this, then I support the partnership.
Ann, did you have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that the maximum I think would be an hour per week for a year. And I don't even know if it's gonna be that much time at all. I think Sarah had asked for, I think 2 hours a month for 2 years. So I think this is doable. I think we have a lot of potential tenants and industries here that I work with already that would be that would benefit from this. And so I think it would be beneficial for us to be involved on a partnership level. And I would have the time to do that because that's one of my jobs anyway, is to figure out how we support those value added food industries and those businesses.
Okay. And
President, I'll go and make a motion, authorize partnership with the Gore's Growing Your Food Network and letter of support for gratification associated with the local food enterprise center.
And if I could just change that, it actually should say and letter of commitment for a grant application rather than letter of support. Sorry.
So noted.
do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Let's see, that's workman's compensation. There's a fascinating subject. Fred?
Okay. This is an annual thing. So we get our workers' compensation insurance from SDIS. And so they ask all special districts for the renewal for next year. And so we have to fill out the form and send it in. And they ask for to be a resolution. So that's what you have. It's just a renewal of our workers' comp.
All right. Is there any discussion? Then can I get a motion?
I move we approve resolution 2019-20-7 for the renewal of workers' compensation insurance for fiscal year 2020-21.
I'll second that.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair's aye. The commission call. Do any commissioners have anything to bring to the table?
I don't.
I don't. And we will, we're done with regular session in that case. We want to take a break before executive?
Okay.
Go straight through it?
I think, doesn't Genevieve got to do something anyway? With
Yeah,
the
she needs to
Zoom?
take us off the live
Yeah,
feed.
so she needs a few minutes to do that.
Yeah, I just need a couple of minutes to stop the live stream. If you want to go ahead and recess, and I can do that.
Okay, then I'll recess the regular session and reconvene for executive session at 7:50.